Hello, my name is Samantha Simpson, and today I will be informing you on why sign language should be taught in schools, and also not just schools, it should just be learned in general. There's plenty of reasons why. It should be taught because of your education. It can help you during your career. Students who are deaf cannot learn as good as hearing students. Just because deaf students can't communicate with their teachers well, they can't communicate with other classmates. Some deaf people cannot read lips, some can, but there's only 28 million Americans have some degree of hearing loss, and those with hearing loss normally tend to read lips. So those who are deaf in both ears may or may not use sign language to communicate, so they have to have some other way. So if sign language is taught in schools and sign language is also taught by the parents of these young children, they're used to learning that way. So if it's taught in their schools, they won't have to learn how to communicate as they get older, and they will already know how to communicate with their classmates when they have either activities, during sports, or just socialization. It is very important that you don't leave other kids out, especially at a young age. So if you learn sign language, it can help you a lot, not only with your education but also your career. It has plenty of benefits. Deaf students who cannot communicate feel left out. So imagine if you're trying to talk to somebody just using the English language and they say something to you but you don't know how to say anything back. You always have to have an interpreter if you can't read lips. And today there's a really big lack of interpreters. You normally have to either pay for an interpreter or wait to see if there is one on call. You cannot always depend on somebody else to communicate for you. You should be able to communicate by yourself, and you should be able to communicate freely, no matter if it's in schools or if you're an adult, if you're out in public, or it's just like learning Spanish or French. Whenever Spanish people come to our country, they learn English. So deaf students should be able to learn their language just like hearing students. In the education, deaf students will fall behind during high school and college very fast. Just because they can't communicate very well, they can learn hands-on very quickly just because that's what they're used to. And the popularity of deaf people can harm the students' career options, such as either becoming a nurse, a surgeon, or really anything medical. It's hard to get a job if not everybody knows sign language and only the deaf student knows sign language, because whoever is going to hire you or hire a deaf student, they think, oh, well, this person cannot communicate if something bad was to happen or an emergency would happen. So it's very hard for deaf students to communicate. They normally have to stay in the deaf community, go to deaf schools, or they have to depend on interpreters. So a small percentage of them don't sign, they only read lips. So those that don't sign or read lips, they have a hard time participating fully in the real world. And it's not really fair to hearing students as it is to deaf students, because you're learning English during schools, but you're not learning their language, because sign language to them is the only language that they know. So in the workplace, first responders should have to have some type of communication. If a patient comes in and they are hurt and they are deaf, they will not be able to communicate to the nurses and the doctors on what is wrong with them. They will have to depend on if there's an interpreter or not, and that can be very dangerous. Just because you have to see if you're allergic to any type of medications, or telling them what's wrong, how you feel. If you come into the ER, you have to tell them your name. Anything could happen, or you might not be able to communicate. Something might be wrong with your face or anything. You could do sign language, and that would be another type of communication to explain to them what has happened or what's going on. If you do not know this information, patients might get treated wrong, and it might lead to future problems. Also, service providers must gain different types of information, such as psychologists or therapists. They should be able to talk to their patients. So if sign language is taught in schools or just in general, this can help the workplace very much. It has so much more benefits if everybody would be able to communicate freely. Because for deaf students, it's hard just to stay in the deaf community because there's not that many people that know sign language. Just for an example, if you're going through a shopping mall, if you're going through the courthouse, if you're going to the hospital, banks, grocery stores, anywhere, you have to think of who you go to through an everyday life that teaches deaf students. They cannot communicate. So knowing basic sign in a career, if you owned a business, would help you tremendously just because you would get more people coming into your business and buying from you. Or just at an everyday job, you can encounter many deaf students or just many deaf people in general because you don't realize how many people are deaf in the world until you work in the public. Also, during the deaf community, you can only sign. So if the deaf community gets exposed to hearing students throughout school, they would be able to learn more. They would be able to communicate through their education, and their parents also would not have to worry about them. And while you're getting a career, there is a whole lot more options that you can take in college if everybody learns sign language. When it's taught at a younger age, it's a lot easier because you're learning your alphabet as you're in grade school, and then you're also learning your alphabet in the sign language. So you have a hands-on, so as you're learning the letter A, you have a sign to go with it. Some students learn a lot better when it's hands-on, so in the long run, it helps out a lot more than just worrying about if you can communicate. It helps in the careers also, and it gives the world, just makes it a better place. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask.